Today, we're fixing intake welds on a Mitsubishi Eclipse.
Granny shifting, not double clutching like you should.
So what's going on, guys? Today, we're gonna show you how to install the diamond plate floor on a Mitsubishi Eclipse. But in reality, we're actually gonna be filling in this big hole up top. It's gonna be a Fast and Furious replica car. You're gonna see a few of us working on the project. We're gonna be making a big patch, gonna use an English wheel, put a little shape in the metal, get it welded in. Then the guys are gonna put a roof scoop on it, get all that body worked. Then we're gonna prime the roof. Later, you're gonna see us actually paint this car. So the actual opening is about 21 1/4 by 31 1/4. What we're then doing, I actually made it 24. We're gonna go to 34. That'll give us a little bit of space to be able to drop this on, put some shape into it, and then we're gonna come up from underneath and actually trace our true cut line once we have the panel formed.
While Cody is rough cutting the roof patch panel, he has the other guys stripping the factory paint off the roof to have an edge to weld to. We cover the car with welding blankets and paper to protect the glass and interior.
I live my life 2 feet of tape paper at a time. It's about 3, maybe 4.
So we're gonna use the stomp shear here to cut our panel down to rough size. It's really handy and it makes a really nice straight cut. All you gotta do is hop on here and then you just kinda. I am not big enough.
Ryan.
So quick update, we were able to strip back the roof. We've got good clean metal that we're gonna be able to weld to. We've got a rough cut patch here. We made it a couple inches large in each direction. We just got it sitting on here. And you can see this roof is not flat. It's got curve both front to back and side to side. So we're gonna use our profile gauge, get a good idea, a good read on what this curve is first in this direction. And then we'll be able to mark the center line of the panel and begin to do a little bit of English wheeling. We're gonna have to be really careful that we don't go too far. The last thing we wanna do is build a big old hump. So we're just gonna try and put a little bit of shape in there, get this thing to where it sits nice and flat, and then we'll mark and we'll cut this out to make it fit tight. So some people may look at this and say, shit, I'll just weld this panel in.
I said forget about it, cuz.
I wouldn't do that. You're gonna end up with an oil can mess. It's gonna be all low. It's not gonna be shaped right. Really, by putting some shape into the panel, it's gonna strengthen it up and give it rigidity. That's what we're looking for.
The roof has an arc both front and back and side to side. We use the profile gauge to get an idea of what kind of curve we need to put in our new filler panel.
So you can see when we bring this back here, it's gonna give us a nice template and show us the shape we need. And again, we're gonna do this arch first, get it sitting here, see how that looks.
With a rough idea, we can start adding shape to this by forming it with our benchtop English wheel. The English wheel works by lightly stretching the metal, so we check our progress often to make sure we don't overstretch it. After a couple of rounds, we add some key marks to the filler panel. They identify where the panel will be cut down to, the front, back, and where it needs further forming.
All right, so we got decent curve going here. So we're just gonna come the last 5 inches, add just a little bit more curve to it. All right, so we've got our curve pretty well established, side to side. Now we just gotta give it a little bit more curve front to back. After a few rounds with the English wheel, we were able to get some good curve into this panel. It's sitting more or less where we want it. It's not perfect, but it's got the nice shape left to right, and it's got a little bit of curve front to back. We're gonna now trace it, cut it out. We'll be able to do a little bit more fine tuning once we have it to the exact size and go from there. I'm gonna then take this out, make that bigger, and then we'll come back and scribe the exact line. Now that we scribed it, you can see we've got a good clean cut edge all the way around the panel. This is gonna let us sneak up on it with our electric metal shears. It's amazing how close you can get and how accurate of a cut you can make with these. I'm sure we're gonna have to do some fine tuning, make this fit just right, but the whole key is let's start making it smaller. So what we'll do for these corners is make a few straight cuts, really just get that radius, and then we can always come back with a flap disc, dial that in.
We do some fine tuning with tin snips and a grinder, then lay it in the roof for inspection.
I think we did a good job, Ryan. It fits. After a bunch of trimming and a lot of test fitting, we were able to get this thing pretty dialed in to where it's sitting. It's got good shape, it's pretty consistent, it's not really wiggly or anything, so we're gonna slowly start tacking it in.
The panel's in place and ready to go. So for tacking, we bust out the MIG 180. We're going to tack nice and slow so we can keep the heat distortion to a minimum. We also got a chance to try out these new edge welding MIG nozzles, which help improve visibility when welding.
Well, we got it tacked in place. It's sitting still where we want it. So now we're just slowly start welding it in. Hey Dave, how was the tuna salad here?
I like the tuna here. Bullshit, asshole. No one likes a tuna here.
Now we got to weld it home. We're gonna give it a shot with the AC/DC MP200i on TIG. I think with the fit up we got, it should actually go pretty smooth. If that doesn't work out though, we can switch right over to MIG and just weld it home. So let's get into it.
We sharpen our tungsten and get to work. Cody's actually using 035 MIG wire as his filler rod here. All of this is to keep the heat down and minimize warping the panel.
All right, so what we're gonna do as we're welding around, you can see where the panel is just sitting a little bit low in the hole. We're gonna try and bring this flush to the factory roof. You can see where it's a little low. We got Adam in the car. Adam's gonna use his body hammer handle, push up, and he can just maneuver that for us. So Adam, if you could just push up a little bit more. Actually, a little bit more. There we go. So what we did, we ran around the panel and tried to get a bunch of tacks in a few different areas. Really, we want to keep this thing as flat as possible and minimize our heat. So we're going to keep working around the panel slowly. We're going to take breaks, make sure it stays cool, and just go from there.
While working, it's important to constantly check your panel for fitment as the heat can distort its shape. Ours came slightly misaligned after welding, so we address it by cutting a tack and getting it back into plane by applying pressure from inside the car. These kinds of things should lessen the bodywork later on.
So with a couple hours of time, we went back and forth quite a bit. We were able to get this fully welded in. The car's sheet metal ended up moving a little bit here and there, but the patch stayed in place and the patch did not oil, can, or warp. So that's great. We're now gonna pass this over to Adam and Ryan. They're gonna focus on doing the body work and getting this thing dialed in and getting the scoop on.
So back to this being a really unconventional project, we need to do some body work to get the roof fairly straight. Then we can mount the scoop, and then we can finish the bodywork and move to primer. The scoop has flat flanges it sits on, so we want as much of that surface area to contact the roof as we can. With all of that said, we start by grinding our welds flat and stripping back the paint even further with a flap wheel and a DA sander. At this point, we're realizing the factory sheet metal moved way more than we had hoped. Even with taking our time, using TIG instead of MIG, and moving frequently, these things can still happen. Not a problem though. We can address these issues by using our stud welder attachment and slide hammer. This is a technique that's been around for decades in the auto body field. Essentially, you weld little studs in low spots of your metal, clamp on your slide hammer, and pull the metal back straight. After a little bit of work, we cut off the studs and move on to fiberglass. Oh my God! Spoon engines! So our next step is to skim the roof in fiberglass reinforced body filler. This is great for sealing up weld seams, and since it's reinforced, it's less likely to crack than traditional body filler. We actually have a new mix we're testing on this car as well that's easier to spread and sand than our older version. Ryan gets a couple rounds in, applying, sanding flat with 80 grit, and repeating. We get this fairly flat and roll on our black OptiFlow epoxy primer. Go home, pizza boy, road's closed. Is not what you would say to this car. So we're in the middle of this masterpiece right here, and it's a very unconventional workflow process. So in the midst of what we're doing, we had to apply epoxy primer for rust prevention before we put on the fiberglass roof scoop. Most of this is gonna end up getting sanded off. We just won't be able to access the center section. So before we glue it onto the roof, we wanted to make sure that it was nice and protected.
Kind of where we are now. We threw the roof scoop on, we got it test fit, we found center, we trimmed the roof scoop, and then we drilled some holes and threw some clecos in it. So basically the clecos will just hold the entire panel in place while we're test fitting and moving it around. But we think we got it pretty squared away. We think we're ready to go attach it to the roof now. So we're gonna use some panel bond. It's an adhesive, so that's gonna be the main thing holding the roof scoop to the panel. We're gonna apply the adhesive, put the roof scoop down, cleco it, and then we're gonna come back. We're actually gonna remove a cleco one by one and install a rivet. So that's what a lot of these guys on the forums do. We're just gonna follow suit because we've never done this. So we'll get all of our rivets in, we'll let it sit for 24 hours, we'll come back and we will start applying the mountain of mud that is gonna take this thing to look straight.
All right, so the scoop's on, mounted. It's got the panel bond holding it down, and then we even added a couple rivets to make sure that this thing isn't gonna fly off when it's going down the highway. Our next step is gonna be to start smoothing this into the roof, making it nice and Frenched in. We're gonna start by hitting this with the DA, getting rid of these edges, and then we can go ahead, take our short strand fiberglass and smooth it in, cover it in some light body filler, and get this all looking good. We're gonna go a little bit light so that it doesn't kick quite as quick. And then your goal with this stuff is always to keep air bubbles from coming in. So you wanna try and keep it as flat as possible and not introduce more air. Especially for your normal body filler stuff. Because otherwise you have pinholes and then you gotta fill them again. It's a pain in the ass. We have this big gap to fill. This is probably gonna take more than one pass. This is definitely more of a sculpting than a traditional filler thing, but this is a pretty unconventional project. So we have to get a little creative with our methods, because you should not actually mount a fiberglass roof scoop on your roof.
Sorry, car.
So what we're doing here, this is still pretty green. We're gonna go ahead and just knock it by hand. Obviously this is not flat yet, so we're not at blocking stage. We know we need to add more filler. So instead of blocking this just to also then add more filler and need to block it again, we're just gonna scuff this up and then apply another coat right away. Then maybe we can move on to a block.
After a few more rounds of applying fiberglass, we get to blocking. We pop out the contour DSB with some 80 grit and start going to town. Once we get it roughed out to within an 1/8 inch of being straight, we can swap over to plastic body filler. This is the same process we've been doing. Apply another coat of filler, block until your high spots are showing, and then repeat. You'll notice this takes a lot of mud. I also should have stuck with the DSB more. I hit this with the DA a couple times and it made a ton of dust. So, quick pro tip, when you're doing body work, you want to go to the edge of a panel. That way, you get your body panel nice and flat, and then when you're done, go ahead and feather the edge as the last thing. Done. All right. So after a ton of body work, we are ready to move on from our 80 grit on the DSB to 180. This thing's finally straight and flat, and now we can go ahead, just remove some of our sanding scratches, and then get this thing into epoxy primer and get it out of here. All right, the bodywork is straight and sanded. Now we can move the car into epoxy primer. You'll notice we've done a bunch of work on the deck lid that we haven't focused on. That will be highlighted as its own video later on. We give the car a final blow off with the air hose, pull it into the MES booth.
It's not about how you prep your car, it's about how you paint your car.
And tape it up. The car is ultimately going to be lime green, so we're going with our standard gray epoxy primer. Once it's wiped down with pre-painting prep and a tack rag, we can let it rip. We do 3 coats with 10-minute flash times in between. After 45 minutes, we pull it out to check out our final results. With all the bodywork in one solid color, it's looking great. This is now going to get some additional replicar mods done, and then we'll see it back here real soon to lay down some of that sick lime green paint. If you also want to add a roof scoop to your car, or any other Fast and Furious mods, you can get all the tools and products you need at Eastwood.com.